I stood frozen in the center of my father's law firm, watching as the senior partners removed his name from the door. Graham, Phillips, Associates, no longer Graham, Phillips, Whitaker. They didn't even wait until after the memorial service. 40 years of dedication erased in a single afternoon. Your father's mistakes cost this firm millions, Charles Graham said, not even looking me in the eye as he supervised the removal. Consider yourself fortunate we're still handling his estate pro bono. I said nothing, clutching the small box of personal items they'd allowed me to collect from his office. A framed photo of me at graduation, his worn leather planner, the antique fountain pen I'd given him for his 60th birthday 3 months ago. At least no one will remember him for long, Phillips muttered to his assistant, just loud enough for me to hear. That was 2 weeks ago. Now I sat in the back row of the memorial service, watching as people filed in, mostly colleagues and acquaintances, their expressions a careful blend of solemn respect and professional distance. No one wanted to be associated too closely with Jonathan Whitaker, the man who allegedly embezzled client funds before his sudden heart attack. My name is Eleanor Whitaker, I'm 29 years old, and until 2 weeks ago, I thought I knew my father, Harvard Law graduate, founding partner of one of the most prestigious firms in Boston, widower who raised me alone after my mother died of cancer when I was 8, strict but fair, distant but dedicated. Now, according to the whispers and the newspaper articles, he was a thief, a fraud, a disgrace to the profession. I didn't believe it, couldn't believe it, but I had no proof. Just a lifetime of knowing a man who color-coded his tax records and lectured me about integrity every time I came home with so much as a borrowed pencil. The service was as cold as the February air outside. The church was half empty. Dean Harrington from Harvard Law gave a stiff eulogy that focused more on the prestige of the institution than on my father. A couple of colleagues spoke about his work ethic and attention to detail. No one mentioned kindness. No one told stories about who he was beyond the office. Then Robert Graham, Charles's son and junior partner, stood up. He straightened his designer tie and cleared his throat. Jonathan Whitaker was my mentor, he began, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. He taught me everything I know about corporate law. He was brilliant, methodical, and demanding. The flicker grew. Which makes his betrayal all the more unforgivable. The hope died. A man of his experience knew exactly what he was doing when he diverted those funds. He knew the damage it would cause, to clients, to colleagues, to the firm his name helped build. His legacy is not one of achievement, but of disgrace. I dug my fingernails into my palms. My father was not there to defend himself. And I, his only child, sat silent, my grief tangled with doubt and anger. Robert continued, his voice hardening, the firm will recover. Of course, the Graham and Phillips families have ensured that all affected clients are made whole, but the damage to trust, to reputation, that may never be fully repaired. I couldn't breathe. The walls of the church seemed to close in. I stood abruptly, needing air, needing escape. All eyes turned to me, some sympathetic, most judgment-filled. I stumbled toward the door, past whispers, past stares. Just as I reached the heavy wooden doors, they swung open. A woman in her early 60s entered, elegant in a simple black dress, her silver hair swept into a neat bun. Behind her was a man about the same age in a wheelchair, and behind him, a small procession of people, at least 20, of varying ages and backgrounds. Some wore expensive suits, others worn but dignified clothes. The woman surveyed the room, her eyes finding mine immediately. You must be Eleanor, she said, her voice warm but commanding. I'm Margaret Chen. Your father saved my family. I blinked, confused. My father had never mentioned anyone named Margaret Chen. The entire church had gone quiet. Robert Graham stood frozen at the podium, mouth slightly open. Margaret turned to address the sparse congregation. I apologize for interrupting, but when we heard about Jonathan's passing, we came as quickly as we could assemble everyone. And who exactly are we? Charles Graham asked from the front row, his tone somewhere between defensive and curious. We are the people Jonathan Whitaker helped over the past 30 years, the ones he never billed, the ones he never spoke about. She gestured to the people behind her. We are his other legacy. Murmurs filled the church as the newcomers found seats. I remained standing by the door, paralyzed by confusion. Margaret gently guided me back to my seat, then walked to the front of the church. No one stopped her as she took her place at the podium. 28 years ago, she began, I was a single mother of 3, facing eviction from our apartment. My husband had died, leaving substantial debts I knew nothing about. The bank was foreclosing, creditors were calling, and I was working 2 jobs while trying to raise my children. She paused, looking around the room. I couldn't afford a lawyer, But someone at the community center gave me Jonathan Whitaker's card. He was already successful then, already with this prestigious firm. I expected him to turn me away. Instead, he took my case, he restructured the debt, fought the foreclosure, and even found a loophole in my husband's life insurance policy that the company had conveniently overlooked. She looked directly at me. He never sent me a bill. When I insisted on paying him something, he asked me to put the money into college funds for my children instead. The man in the wheelchair rolled forward. He adjusted his glasses and spoke in a deep, clear voice. My name is David Mercer. 15 years ago, I was injured in a construction accident. The company denied responsibility. Their insurance refused my claim. I was facing life in a wheelchair with no compensation, no way to support my family. He looked around the room. 5 law firms turned me down before I met Jonathan Whitaker. They said my case wasn't worth their time, that the company was too powerful. Jonathan took my case. He worked on it for 3 years. He won. David's eyes found mine. He changed my life. He refused to take his standard percentage, said he'd rather I use it for my kids' education. One by one, they came forward. A refugee family he'd helped gain asylum, a small business owner whose company he'd saved from a predatory lender, a young lawyer, now a judge, whom he'd mentored and supported through addiction recovery. Each story revealed a side of my father I'd never known. Each person spoke of quiet kindness, of help given with no expectation of recognition or reward. I sat stunned, tears streaming down my face. This was not the distant, work-obsessed father I knew. This was not the man the firm was now vilifying. The last to speak was a young woman about my age. She approached the podium tentatively. My name is Sophia Williams. 10 years ago, I was a 17-year-old foster kid about to age out of the system. No family, no money for college, despite good grades. She twisted her hands together nervously. I was working as an evening janitor at the law firm to save for community college. Most lawyers didn't even see me, but Mr. Whitaker noticed that I was reading his law books when I cleaned his office. She smiled slightly at the memory. He started leaving different books on his desk each night, with notes about which chapters to focus on. Then practice LSAT questions. Then, one night, a complete application package for Harvard, with a note saying he'd pay the application fee. When I got in, he covered what scholarships didn't. She looked directly at the Graham and Phillips families. I graduated last year. Mr. Whitaker came to my ceremony but insisted on sitting in the back. He never wanted recognition. And now I'm starting at the district attorney's office next month. Her voice grew stronger. So when I heard what was being said about him, I couldn't stay silent. Whatever you think he did, there has to be more to the story. This man changed dozens of lives, mine included, and never once asked for credit. The church was completely still. Robert Graham had returned to his seat, his expression unreadable. Charles and the other partners looked uncomfortable, almost embarrassed. Margaret returned to the podium. We aren't here to cause a scene. We're here to honor the man we knew, the man who saw people's value when others didn't, the man who used his privilege and position to lift others up. She turned to me. Your father kept these connections private. He believed help given for recognition wasn't help at all, it was self-promotion. But we thought you should know that his legacy is far greater than what's being reported. I stood up, legs shaking, and walked to the front of the church. For the first time since his death, I felt strength returning. Thank you, I managed, my voice breaking. I didn't know. He never told me. After the service, as people mingled in the church hall, Robert Graham approached me, his expression tight. Eleanor, those people's stories are touching, but they don't change the financial discrepancies. The firm's investigation was thorough, was it? I asked, something hardening inside me. Or was it convenient? He flinched slightly. What does that mean? It means I want to see the evidence myself. I'm a CPA, Robert. I understand numbers. That wouldn't be appropriate. Neither is defaming my father before he's even buried. He stepped back, surprising me with his quick retreat. We should discuss this another time. As he walked away, Margaret approached with several others from her group. Eleanor, we'd like to help, if you'll let us. David was an accountant before his accident. Sophia has legal training. If there's something to find, we'll find it. I looked at these strangers who knew a side of my father I'd never seen. Why would you do this? Margaret took my hand. Because Jonathan Whitaker stood up for each of us when no one else would. Now it's our turn to stand up for him. That night, I returned to my father's house, my house now. It felt cavernous and empty. His study door was ajar, and I entered hesitantly. This had been his sanctuary, a place I rarely visited even as an adult. The bookshelves were meticulously organized, law texts, biographies, classical literature. His desk was neat. everything in its place. I ran my fingers over the leather chair where he'd spent countless evenings working. On impulse, I opened the top drawer. Pens, paper clips, stamps, nothing unusual. The second drawer held files, household bills, car maintenance records, warranties. The third drawer was locked. I frowned. What would my rule-following father keep locked away? I searched for the key, finding nothing in the obvious places. Then I remembered the small key on his personal keychain, the one I'd found in his personal effects from the hospital. It fit perfectly. Inside were dozens of folders, each labeled with a name. I recognized some from the memorial service: Margaret Chen, David Mercer, Sophia Williams. I opened Margaret's file. Inside was a complete record of her case, the legal work he'd done, the hours he'd spent, the results he'd achieved, and stapled to the inside cover was a bill, marked paid in full with a notation, equivalent donated to Boston Children's Hospital. Every file was the same, all the work documented, all the hours accounted for, all with receipts for charitable donations matching what would have been his fees. At the back of the drawer was a larger file labeled Matheson Holdings. I vaguely recognized the name from news about my father's alleged embezzlement. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was evidence of something far different than theft. My father had discovered that Charles and Robert Graham were diverting client funds to offshore accounts, using the Matheson case as cover. There were bank statements, transaction records, emails he had recovered, and a half-finished letter to the ethics board, dated 3 days before his death. My father hadn't stolen anything. He had discovered the theft and was preparing to expose it. No wonder they had moved so quickly to blame him after his death. I sat at his desk until morning, reading every document, piecing together the truth. When the sun rose, I called Margaret Chen. "I need your help," I said. "I need to clear my father's name." What followed was an investigation that would have made my methodical father proud. David examined the financial records. Sophia helped navigate the legal channels. Others from the group provided testimonials, resources, connections. It took 3 months to assemble our case. 3 months of late nights, of threats from the firm, of discovering that my father's heart attack had coincided suspiciously with his discovery of the Graham's fraud. The day we presented our evidence to the State Bar Association and the district attorney, Robert Graham tried one last intimidation tactic. "You're ruining your own reputation along with his," he warned, cornering me outside the hearing room. "No one will hire the daughter of Jonathan Whitaker if you go through with this." I smiled for the first time in months. "That's where you're wrong. I've already been offered a position heading the Financial Forensics Division at the Chen Foundation." His face paled. "The what?" "Margaret Chen's late husband left her a considerable fortune. She's been using it for years to help people like those my father represented pro bono. Now she's expanding to fight financial fraud against vulnerable populations." I straightened my jacket, my father's old Harvard Law sweatshirt underneath giving me courage. "It seems my father's legacy isn't what you thought it was, and neither is mine." The hearing lasted all day. When it was over, Robert and Charles Graham were taken into custody. The evidence was irrefutable. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered. I stood flanked by Margaret, David, Sophia, and dozens of others whose lives my father had touched. "Miss Whitaker, how does it feel to clear your father's name?" a reporter called out. I thought carefully before answering. My father used to tell me that integrity means doing the right thing even when no one is watching. For 30 years, he helped people quietly, expecting nothing in return. He fought injustice without seeking recognition. When he discovered corruption, he prepared to confront it, knowing it might cost him everything. I looked at the crowd gathered around me, not colleagues or acquaintances, but people whose lives had been changed by quiet acts of kindness. Today, justice was served, but the true victory was discovering who my father really was, not just a brilliant lawyer, but a good man who understood that real legacy isn't built in boardrooms or on brass nameplates. It's built in the lives we touch when no one's looking. 6 months later, I stood in front of the newly established Jonathan Whitaker Legal Clinic, cutting the ribbon on its opening day. The clinic would provide free legal services to those who couldn't afford representation, funded by a combination of the Chen Foundation and the settlement from the lawsuit against Graham Phillips. My father's name had been cleared publicly, the firm was now under new management, and I had found my purpose continuing the work he had done in secret for so many years. As people filed in for the opening reception, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known since before his death. My father and I had never been close in the way I had wished. There had always been a distance, a formality between us that I couldn't breach. Now I understood why. His emotional reserve hadn't been coldness, it had been compartmentalization. He had divided himself between the successful public attorney and the private humanitarian, between the strict father and the compassionate advocate. I wished I could tell him that I finally understood, that I was proud to be his daughter, that his true legacy would continue. That evening, after everyone had left, I sat alone in my new office. On the wall hung a single framed photograph, my father at my law school graduation, his usual serious expression softened just slightly with pride. Beside it now hung a new plaque, inscribed with words from one of his case notes I had found: "Justice served quietly is still justice. Kindness given anonymously is still kindness. A life of integrity is its own reward." I opened my laptop and began working on my first pro bono case. Outside my door, the clinic's waiting room was already full for the next day's appointments, people needing help, seeking justice, looking for someone to stand beside them when no one else would. My father had done his work in silence, but his legacy would speak volumes. In the quiet of that moment, I felt closer to him than I ever had when he was alive, and I knew that somewhere, somehow, he was proud that his most carefully guarded secret, his compassion, was now his most celebrated legacy. If this story moved you, remember the quiet heroes in your own life, those who help without recognition, who give without reward, who stand for what's right even when it costs them. Their legacies may not be carved in stone or printed in headlines, but they are written in the lives they change. And sometimes, the most powerful legacies are the ones we discover only after they're gone.